Hello, everybody, and welcome or welcome back to the second shelf and to the June review of the June classic that I picked off my list of the 12 classics that I want to read in 2023. If you're not familiar with this project, I will leave a link to, a list with all the 12 classics that I picked down below, and you can join in if you want to. I read one a month, and then I review this book towards the end of the month, mostly around the 27th, 26th, something like that, and pick from a jar with, I pick the next one for the next month. So in June, it was a real delight because the weather was horrible. We had the first real heat wave with, temperatures in the 90s, and it didn't cool down at night, and it was humid, and I was just feeling cranky and gross all the time. And luck would have it that my June pick was Lady Susan by Jane Austen. Light breeze, so to speak, in my at least reading wise, I had a light breeze. I wish we had breezes. And it was, of course, also interesting because the last couple of books, I'm looking at the pile here, the last 4 books, I read The Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl. I read Iola Leroy, also a slave story. We read Orinoco. We read narrative, a Bondswoman's narrative. So these books were all, Orinoco was way earlier in the 17th century, but it's interesting how different life is if you're white and of at least modest means, so not poor, and certainly not black, and certainly not enslaved. And sometimes I think we tend to forget that these two worlds existed next to each other, because as much as I admire Jane Austen, she never mentions slavery at all, ever, in her books. Black people, poor people. Anyway, but for me, it was a real delight, and it was even more a delight because I buddy-read it together with Heidi from my reading life, because she bought Lady Susan when she and her husband came over to Europe, and we met and spent some time together in Amsterdam, and that meant also book browsing. You should watch her vlogs. It's fantastic, and it's such a delight. And she bought Lady Austen, not this edition, and so we read it together. And, it's a really good memory also because she bought it together with me. I was there when she bought it in Amsterdam. Anyway, enough of the public service announcement. So this was Lady Austen is the last novel, finished novel of Jane Austen that I hadn't read yet. There are 2 fragments here also, the Watsons and Sanditon. I will not talk about those. I read those, but I will not talk about those in this video because the pick for June was Lady Susan. It was published for the first time posthumously in 1871, and as you Jane Austen died in 1817, but it was written way, way earlier. The manuscript had a date of 1805, but the research says that it was probably written when she was about between 18 and 20. So in the late mid 1790s, 1794, 1795, which is an amazing fact in and of itself, because it's really good. Spoiler alert, I loved it. I think it's right up there with my favorite Jane Austen, which is Persuasion. Yeah, it's not Sense and Sensibility, and it's not Pride and Prejudice. My favorite is definitely Persuasion, probably also because in Persuasion you have a more experienced woman as a heroine, Anne Elliot, and she is also older in terms, she seems very young to me when she's in her mid-30s, but other women in Austen's books are often what I would call girls. They're 17, 18, 19, so anyway, this is an epistolary novel. It was never published for whatever reasons, by the way, whether it was Austen's decision not to, but it's an epistolary novel, so written in letters. It's 30 letters or something, I think. In total, no more, I'm sorry, 40 letters, 41 letters and a conclusion. It ends with a conclusion. And it's a really, really short, it's more a novella, I would say. It's just really just over 100 pages, 103 pages. And it centers around the title character, Lady Susan, who has recently been widowed. She is a widow for 4 months, and she has a daughter, Frederica, who is 16. And Lady Susan, as she is described in the letters, there are letters from her to friends, to other people, but it's not only her letters, it's also letters of her sister-in-law to the mother of her friend, back to her. So you have various constellations in terms of letter writing, but except for 2 or maybe 3, all the letters are written by women. And mostly the recipient is also a woman. So that is, I think, already an really interesting fact. Lady Susan is not portrayed as a sympathetic, likable character. She is scheming, she is manipulative, she is not conforming to what a good woman should do. So she has an affair, at least that is rumored, with a married man, and then she has to leave there, and she takes refuge, so to speak, at her brother-in-law. So the younger brother of her deceased husband and his wife, and there she has another love interest, younger man, which is, I thought it was really surprising that was not an issue. I know that Jane Austen herself got a proposal from a man 6 years her junior. But the relationships here, Lady Susan, the ones that she has with a man called Sir James Martin and with Reginald, they are in their early 20s, so they are at least 12 to 15 years younger than she is. And that didn't seem to be an issue. There's an issue with the fact that she has a bad reputation and that she is supposed to be a marriage wrecker. She also tries to get her daughter married to a man that her daughter detests. And that is maybe the only thing that I really hold against her, because for the rest, it's more that she seems to be a woman who is just trying to do her own thing. And yes, she has affairs, and yes, she manipulates guys, but so are all the other women in the books, in the book. It's, I think what Jane Austen is telling me is that is the way for a woman having no agency over her life, other than as a daughter, a wife, or a mother. In order to get stuff done, you have to get guys to do what you want, because they make the decisions. So it's an interesting look on female life, and I really, really can't believe it goes to the genius of Jane Austen that she wrote this when she was herself a girl, 18, 19, maybe 20. The language is wonderful. It's very witty, and it's not that moralistic. Some of the issues that I sometimes have with Jane Austen is that she has sometimes, for me at least, a little bit of a wagging moral finger. She doesn't have that here, even though she's not portraying Lady Susan in a favorable light. I don't know whether she met somebody like that, or whether it's a take on a certain type of woman, but it's fascinating because most of her characters, at least the heroine characters, are good girls. I mean, you have, the younger daughter in the Bennet family who runs off with an officer. You have Mary Crawford in Mansfield Park, who is not, she's manipulative, but the main people, Elizabeth Bennet or Eleanor and Marianne, they're Anne Elliot, even though she made a wrong choice, but they are good women. Lady Susan is not, and that makes her even more interesting. I loved it. I had so much joy. Heidi said to me on the last check-in that the only qualm she has with the book is that it could have been longer. And I agree, it would have been a pleasure to read those letters. But I feel for the plot she wanted to tell is probably the right length, because otherwise it would have gotten too repetitive, I think. But yeah, if you are if you are a Jane Austen fan, you have probably read this. If not, Lady Susan, and it's available as a separate book, so you don't have to buy the Watsons and Sand edition with it. Heidi bought an edition with just Lady Susan. It's an absolute delight, and if I count this as her debut in terms of one of the first things that she written, that makes it even more amazing. And I had so much fun with Lady Susan and her scheming, trying to get the right man and trying to get her daughter to marry a guy. It was just, it was funny and it was delightful, and I had the best time reading this. So if you haven't picked it up, I can highly, highly recommend it. And it's short, 103. So, I mean, you can read it in 1 or 2 sittings. Yeah. Anyway, that was the June book. Now on to, there are 6 more little red folded piece of paper left, and no, I'm not looking before, so I'm just picking one. I mean, it's the choices are not that many anymore. It's only 6, so I'm gonna pick this one. Let's see what it is. Oh, another. We go back to the more heavy, important stuff. Our Nick. Let me see where I have it here. This one, Our Nick, by Harriet E. Wilson. Sketches from the Life of a Free Black. First published in 1859, Our Nick is an autobiographical narrative that stands as one of the most important first-hand accounts of Black experience in the antebellum North. So this was published before Lady Susan, but written afterwards. But it's more or less Jane Austen time. And again, I think I really like that I picked this one by chance, because to sort of sandwich the typical literature that we know, I think, from the early 19th, mid-19th century, is the Jane Austen type of literature. And this was a big part of the world that I at least haven't read enough about, and certainly not original accounts. So this will be the July pick. I hope that you join me. I will probably, let me check the calendar, end of July, as always, probably the 26th of July. I will do my review. So this was the review of the June classic, Lady Susan, and the pick for July, Our Nick. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed it. As always, leave me a comment if you're so inclined, and I'll talk to you all soon in the next one.